What is your response to the budget? And I'm very delighted to welcome back to the show a gentleman who guided us first through the credit crunch, then through the recession, with a hideously clear eye for our suffering and predicted all of this. And he joins me back on the show. It's Jonathan Davis, Economy and Investment Advisor. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Vanessa.
We can never rely on you for the upbeat, glitzy, shiny top spin on any story. We can rely on you, though, for the bottom line. And what is your response to the budget yesterday?
It is going to be grim for the economy, for families, for the next 2 or 3 years. However, I truly believe that Osborne has taken a long-termist view, to which I say thank goodness, because that's what we've been needing in this country for so long. And as we reduce the amount that we're borrowing, we can keep interest rates low for longer, and that in itself will help us get out of the mess that we're in.
Now, just for the record, you're not a politician, you're not a party political man, you're an independent financial advisor. This is your personal view on this. Therefore, what was your response to Gordon Brown and the Labour Party, who took a diametrically opposed view? They're still saying that this budget is unnecessarily draconian and that what it's going to do is just set everything back in a dramatic way, which is going to plunge the economy into this double dip.
I think that they're being extremely economical with the truth, as the phrase used to be, because Alistair Darling, the Shadow Chancellor, the then Chancellor, had already outlined 40-odd billion pounds of cuts. So for them to say that they weren't going to cut, and for them to say that they would have deferred it for another 6 months would have made a difference is absolute, utter nonsense. Everyone talks about we might go back into recession. There might be a double dip. Let me tell your listeners that a double dip, I'm afraid to say, is just a euphemism for depression. We are in depression. We have been in depression. I know that sounds strange for a couple of years. We just haven't much felt it. We didn't feel it because with an election coming from last year, as we were in the depths of recession, to this year, with an election coming, the government turned on the borrowing and spending taps. Thus, the people out there, the voters, didn't feel the recession. Well, I tell you, we're going to feel it now. And it has to happen, because the Labour argument is totally unfounded, because if we continued to borrow and spend even close to what we were doing, I tell you, the global lenders would have said enough's enough. They would have hiked our interest rates. They would have doubled them within a couple of months. What would that have done to mortgages? What would that have done to business loan costs? Everyone can imagine what that would have done to the economy. This way, we have a chance to get out of the dire state that we're in.
I knew it wasn't going to be a picnic or any kind of walk in the park talking to you. When everybody else was still talking about the credit crunch, you were saying, no, this is a recession. Now we're still grappling with the idea of a recession, and you're saying this is a fully blown depression, which is certainly not a phrase that anybody in power is using at the moment, Jonathan.
Well, of course they're not. Let me cast people's minds back to 1930. Of course, the 1930s was when we had the last depression. In 1930, no one yet realized that we were in a depression. But it was obvious if you just look through the statistics. And the statistics that we have now, I'm afraid to say, we're in a worse economy than the 1930s. The amount we're borrowing is gargantuan. The amount we owe is gargantuan. And, everyone talked about it up to the election about cutting the deficit.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, most people believed that meant cutting how much we owe. No, cutting the deficit simply meant how much we were borrowing on an annual basis. The amount we owe is £900 billion. The amount we borrowed last year was about £160 billion. We're going to borrow 140, 150 billion this year. That's enormous. And then you add on the vast amount of household debt that families up and down the country hold. Well, It's going to take a long time before we get out of this mess, and the only thing we could do, and don't get me wrong, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be grim. The only thing we can do is to cut the borrowing and spending, and that way we can keep interest rates low, we can encourage investment in businesses, and that way we can hopefully get employment going again.
Explain to us, if you can, how, people will remember learning in history, and some people, well, I think, nobody's going to be old enough to remember the phony war, when it seemed like we were going to war, but we kind of didn't for ages. This has felt to some people like a kind of phony recession. Some people have borne the brunt of it and have felt it instantly. Other people haven't. There have been people whose mortgages have been unbelievably cheap, so they've had loads and loads of disposable cash that they didn't have before. They've been living the life of Riley. There have been people who in London, because this is a London programme, who were told that their property prices, the price of the property they own would plunge, but actually, amazingly, it didn't. And they sold their properties for really quite good sums of money. There have been people who thought they would lose their jobs and didn't, and actually were earning quite well. And, there have been people who've been having really quite a jolly time of it right through the recession. And people who've been reading about it and hearing about it and just feeling, well, okay, fine, it hasn't actually touched me. I thought it would, but it hasn't. Now, is that situation going to continue for some, or is everybody going to feel the pain now?
Everyone is. As I say, up to the election, in fact, for the year up to the election, the then government did everything possible to not have people experience a recession. It was, in my view, quite simply a political decision. So they ramped up borrowing even further, they ramped up spending, and many people who lost their jobs in the private sector then found a job in the public sector. As you say, mortgage rates were slashed to try and help get the economy moving. And yes, we've had a phony recession in one sense, in that households in general have not felt the recession, which is crazy because in every other country around the world they felt it. What was the difference? The difference was we had an impending election. And what is left to us is is a massive economic hangover, which George Osborne started to do something about yesterday. You're absolutely correct. I am apolitical. I'm taking an economist stance here.
Yes.
There are some economists who say, no, you've got to keep on borrowing, got to keep on spending, but they're missing the vital point that the amount that the global lenders are charging has been kept low because Osborne and his colleagues said, as they came into power, we're going to do something about the borrowing. And if he didn't do something significant about the borrowing yesterday, I tell you, today we would have higher borrowing costs, and within 2 or 3 months we would probably be paying, the government's paying 4% on their borrowing now, the government would be paying 6 or 7%. Exactly what happened in Iceland, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Latvia. How many more canaries in the coal mines does it need to get people to realize that the global lenders are the people in charge? People said to me, so what's this election going to do for the economy, for the markets? Do you know what? The markets didn't really care much about the election. What they care about was what's happening with China, with America, with European debt. That's what the markets cared about. And if the UK didn't do something about our dire finances, I tell you, our borrowing costs were going to go through the roof, and we would have exactly the same situation like in Greece and Spain.